What is up, folks? It is Jaypher, and if you're like me and you're hovering right around the 60-year-old age, and you remember in the 90s how mice were kind of dominated by that thick, heavy ball, and you always had to clean it, Microsoft finally announced a WMO, the wheel mouse optical. That was such a big deal because it uses an optical sensor, and then our parents warned us not to look into it because they thought we'd go blind. Well, now fast forward to 2022, and Gamesense has come out with the MVP. It's essentially an inspired WMO shape that I think a lot of folks are really going to love, so let's take a look at it. Priced at $99.99 USD, it's sitting well below the cost of your name brand premium mice out there, but don't be fooled and don't make a mistake as this being a compromise for quality, as under the hood we have a 3370 sensor, a very common popular sensor found in most of our wireless mice these days, as well as KEL 4.0 switches, but not just in mouse 1 and 2, but also on the side buttons and within the scroll wheel, which is really interesting. We also have 100% PTFE feet, as well as USB-C connectivity, and that's all housed within a nice medium-sized mouse coming in at 75 grams. You have RGB at the palm as well as the underglow, but you have to turn all that off to reach the battery's full potential of right around 64 hours. Not the greatest in hours among other wireless mice out there, but it still is pretty modest. As I mentioned with the feet, these are two large 100% PTFE feet on the bottom. They're tapered and well-rounded. Zero complaints with using them. Next to the sensor is going to be the on-off switch. It is just a one and done 2.4 gigahertz signal, no Bluetooth here. And then you also have an RGB button. You'll notice also the sensor is ever so slightly lower than what I would believe the center of the mouse. At least it doesn't run parallel with where I rest my thumb on the side. Either way though, it's definitely going to be different depending on how you grip the mouse, but it's nothing to be concerned over. Now normally with mice that are wireless and around $100 and are not name brands like your Razer or Logitech, you kind of come to expect a little bit of some sacrifice on structural integrity. Not the case with the MVP. This thing is an absolute unit. It does not move or budge at all when I put a lot of pressure on it. There's no creaking or weird sounds. It is all in all a very sturdy mouse. And this is a detached trigger design, so I expected some wobble, but the tolerances were so tight there was hardly any movement on mouse 1 and 2. The scroll wheel is seated nice and deep into the body with nice quiet tactile steps. It's also rounded along the edges to allow for some quick side scrolling with the side of your finger during those frantic moments, and the threading on the wheel is also extremely grippy and it doesn't seem to collect any dust or hair over time. The one thing I do want to be fully transparent on, my copy did seem to have some occasional chirping when I did move it in slow intervals like this. Now, rest assured, I did reach out to Gamesense. I sent them the same footage. They did say it's a small, isolated incident. They did send this out to the manufacturer so that way they can work on this and work out the kinks. Now, keep in mind, this is a small chirping sound, and we're all going to be wearing headsets anyway, so you probably won't even notice it, but it is something I wanted to address with my copy. The side buttons are massive, and one of my favorite parts about this mouse, because they're so big, but the sides are large enough that's going to allow my thumb to rest comfortably without interfering on the side buttons, and I can still easily roll up and engage them. There is super minimal pre-travel and zero post-travel on my copy. These are as premium as it gets with those 4.0 switches. And what you heard there was those sharp, heavy clicks of the KEL 4.0 switch. I absolutely love this switch as we're seeing more and more of your Omron 20. We're seeing more and more of the KEL GM 8.0 and even the TCC switches that are out there. And I do like those, but the 4.0s that I was first introduced to with the XM1 RGB mouse, I absolutely fell in love with. I'm glad Gamesense went with this option. Default, it's set at 4 milliseconds though, so I do recommend downloading the additional software to make the personal adjustments that you prefer on your debounce. And while you also have that software downloaded, this will also allow you to do any profile editing, button remapping, DPI tweaking, as well as battery conserving options. Now, if you're someone that was really accustomed to the G Pro or the super light shape, I definitely recommend checking out the MVP. Now, they're not going to be a one-to-one shape because, well, Logitech didn't use the WMO as an inspiration on their series of mice, but I will say though, it definitely had some trickery on my hand, as I kind of felt I was using the Superlight while I had the MVP. They're not going to be identical. There are some distinctive differences, but it definitely does draw some comparison. And with the MVP being modeled after the WMO, there are going to be some distinctive differences, and for good reason, given the introduction of side buttons, of course, and the expectations of today's mice. You'll be able to use any grip style, as it doesn't have any extreme angles, there's no off-putting dimensions. I developed zero fatigue while in a relaxed or aggressive claw grip using the MVP. The rear hump is not a magnet to your palm like, say, the Zowie S2 or the Roccat Burst Pro, but it's just enough on that back slope to really kind of cushion your palm and give you the confidence of a solid grip. And the front end sits a little higher than, say, the G Pro or the Superlight. And with the G Pro and Superlight front buttons kind of going at a more distinctive downward slope, it's a little bit more rounded on the MVP. The sides are pretty curvy, and that it hugs the inside of the knuckle perfectly for a fingertip or a palm gripper. It's overall a great shape that I would definitely feel recommending to anyone that does often change their grip style depending on the game, as well as with myself having a 19 by 10 centimeter hand size. Definitely looking at someone with medium or small hands. While I love the shape and the dimensions of the MVP, I don't necessarily like the surface, and that's really my biggest complaint of all. I love the matte finish look, but it's slippery, and if you have cold hands, getting a grip can be quite difficult. It does show fingerprints, but it's easy to clean off, so if that's something that bothers you, it won't be a hassle. At the end of the day, I think that the MVP is quite the contender for Gamesense's first entry into the wireless mouse arena. There are some hiccups, like the surface. I would like to see a better surface in, say, a version 2 of this mouse. And I would also like to see maybe a charging dock, or at least an attachable USB dongle, so that way we can limit the amount of USB ports it has to take up on our PC. Very minor gripes. At the end of the day, this is a really great mouse at a really strong price, and I think that a lot of folks might overlook this, given that this is Gamesense's first entry. And honestly, I really think you're going to miss out if you don't end up picking up an MVP. So I will leave a link in the description below. It's not an affiliate link. I'm not getting anything out of it. But if you do want to pick one up yourself, you will be able to get one directly through Gamesense themselves. And I do appreciate them sending this out for review, as I was pretty intrigued with this after their Meta mouse was such a hit for me some 5 or 6 months ago. But if you enjoyed the video, please throw a like, and of course hit that subscription button. That always means a ton. Until next time, I'm Jaypher. Stay safe.